Also, you can, before we start though, wait, sorry, Layla. Hi there, I have a very fun project to share with you today. Recently, I posted a little YouTube short and an Instagram reel of me making this little round pot holder. And I asked if I should make a tutorial, and lots of people said yes. But the reason a lot of people said yes was the surprising thing. It was mostly about the curved binding. So if you've never used or made curved binding before, this is the project for you to learn on because it's so simple. It's no more difficult than straight binding. Actually, it might be even easier because you don't have to turn any corners. So we're going to make a little quilted pot holder today. I had a lot of these leftover hexagons, like pre-cut Heather Ross hexagons. They were left over from that hexagon quilt that I made. And so I wanted to turn them into something because they're so cute. And so this is what I came up with, but I also made this one out of this other lonely quilt block that I had. Sometimes I just want to try a quilt block idea without committing to a big quilt. And so I end up with lonesome quilt blocks. They're orphan blocks. And so I really try to find projects to do with these. I should make a video on projects to make with orphan quilt blocks because I do it all the time. So this is what I came up with for this specific quilt block. So I am Nikki, this is Pin Cut Sew, and this is what we're going to be making today. Before we start though, you can also hop over to my shop and get the printable version of this project with step-by-step instructions and photos. You don't have to have that to make this, but it is a more convenient way to remake it over and over again and have the instructions right in front of you. So I will definitely link to that in the very first part of the description. So yeah, let's just get right started. Let's just get right to it. That's how it goes. Okay, so some things you're going to need are just something for your center. I have these little pre-cut hexies. I need to decide which one to use. Ooh, all right, I like the snail. You can really use any shape to do this. If you've watched my little crazy quilting pumpkin coaster tutorial, this is the same concept that I'm gonna do with this. But you can also just, this was a 9-patch blocks, or you can just use one piece of fabric. That's totally fine too. But I'm gonna show you how to do this sort of hexagon crazy quilt style. So let's do that first. You're also for this going to need, this is a product called Insulbrite. It's perfect for inside of pot holders and things because it's heat resistant. And then the instructions tell you to use it with batting. It actually says to use 2 layers of batting, but I find that to be too much for my sewing machine, and I just use 1 and they work just fine. And then you'll need a backing fabric and a binding fabric, which we will get to in just a minute. But first, let's make the front. So I have my little hexagon. You can use any shape with several straight sides on it. I'm going to get out this bin. I think I'm going to stick to my scraps of greens and yellows. So first thing to do is to find a little scrap to start with. So I'm just going to stitch it on to a straight side of my centerpiece. Okay, then I'm going to flip it open and press. And I'm going to go ahead and trim. I'm using my straight edges as a guide to trim away the extra fabric. Okay, and then I'm going to work clockwise around, adding straight pieces as I go. So next I will do this one. This one's on the large side, so I'm going to trim it. Next I think I'll do this. Okay, at this point I have stopped trimming all of the sides because I'm trying to get this just big enough to be able to cut my circle out of, and I'm almost there. Okay, I think that's big enough. Yep. If you purchase the printable version of this pattern piece will come. Yours won't have the cell on the back. But if you do not, you don't have to have that. You can just, I used a compass and I made a circle. I think it's just under 8 inches, or you could trace a plate or whatever round object that you have. So next I'm just going to cut this circle out. If you don't feel comfortable rotary cutting it, you can trace it and use your scissors, or you can pin it on like a pattern piece. Okay. Let me put my scrap bin away. I don't even feel like that really made a dent. Okay, and then we need to cut our pieces of Insulbrite. I will link you to Insulbrite, but you can also just get it at any craft store. So I'm going to cut a piece of Insulbrite. I like to use an older pair of scissors. I don't know what the metal in here does to my nice scissors. But I'm not going to cut it out as a circle yet. I'm just gonna cut it just larger than my circle. And then same with a piece of batting. I do save these little pieces for coasters. My batting, I think it's just Warm and Natural, but my other batting, I also use Pellon Bamboo Blend, so you can just use what you have. I don't think I would use polyester though. Try to get a natural fiber. And then I need a backing fabric. This is perfect. I have this pink linen. It was a dress and I harvested it for fabric. Okay, so same with this. I'm just going to cut a backing piece. Oh my gosh, I keep bumping my head on my camera. And now we're going to quilt lines. You can quilt lines however you want on this and on this one. I'm going to just randomly stitch some lines across it. On this one, I stitched inside and outside every line, 1/4 inch. So you can do what you want. You can place some pins in here if you need to, but I don't really, with these small of pieces, I don't find it very necessary. But if you want to, you can at least just pin the corners together. Okay, and then you're going to need a walking foot for your sewing machine. I know I talk about the walking foot every time I make a quilted project. So I'm going to link you to the video about the walking foot. If you've ever tried to quilt something and you get bunching and it's frustrating, the walking foot is what you need. Okay, so I'm just going to go quilt some straight lines across this. All right, I think that's enough. All right, here's my quilted piece, and now I can cut it out around the circle. If you want to, you can sew a basting stitch all the way around the edge. That can be helpful. Okay, now for binding. So when you make regular quilt binding, and I have some videos on this already, we're gonna use a machine binding method, so there's no hand sewing involved. And I will link to some of those in the description because I think I have a few different binding tutorials. And they're all for different reasons. Like I really love to make big quilts with the hand sewn on the back. But smaller projects, I usually do this machine method. And then those videos will also show you how to take care of the corners. But for this one, we need binding that curves. And so we're going to cut our binding on the bias, which means diagonally. So I need to cut some diagonal pieces of fabric, and I'm going to stick with this pink because I think it looks pretty. I'm going to put my ruler at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to cut pieces of binding this way. I'm going to cut them 2.5 inches wide, and I'm going to need to connect a few together, so I will cut a few pieces. I'm going to cut my pattern in half. Okay, I'm going to have some joints in my binding because this was a dress. That's okay because I'm about to make more joints. So I'm going to make the ends of my pieces of binding square. Let's see if 2 will be enough. Let me just calculate how much we need. Pattern will tell you, but I forgot. So we want enough to go around. So the circumference is 24.5 inches. I'm gonna add 4 inches to that. Let's just say 30. We want it to be 30. So let's see, I should have a perfect amount with just these 2 strips. So to join these 2 together, I don't want to just straight join them because that creates bulk in your binding and it kind of pokes out funny. So I'm going to put them right sides together like this. My fabric doesn't have a right side, but if yours does, we want it right sides together. And then we're going to use a marking tool and we're going to mark a diagonal line. Not here, but here. So you don't want this inner corner. You want to go from outer corner to outer corner, and you're leaving a 1/4 inch overlap here to account for your seam allowance. If you just sewed them like this, then when you open it up, it will be wonky. See? You'll have this big difference there. So you want to leave a 1/4 inch at least overhang. Okay, and then I'm just going to go stitch across this line. All right, now I can cut away the excess, trim the little dog ears, and I'm ready to press it. Okay, so to press my binding, first I'll press this seam to one side. See how perfectly that turns out? And now I'm going to just press my binding in half hot dog style. Because your binding is on the bias, you want to be careful not to stretch it as you go. And that goes for both pressing and for when we sew it on. You don't want to be pulling it as we go, because then you'll end up with a skinnier binding. And especially when you're sewing it on, you'll end up with your pot holder wanting to be a bowl like this if you pull it. So when you get to the leftmost side, you're going to open that back up. You're going to fold it up at a 45-degree angle like this. And then you're going to refold it in half like this. So you have created a little pocket here. Okay, and that's the side you're going to start with when you start sewing it on. But you're not going to start sewing it right at the end. And for this method of machine binding, we're going to start on the back. So I'm going to place my binding here, and I'm going to start here. I am not going to start over here where my pocket is. I'm going to start a few inches past that. I'm going to stitch it on with my walking foot still attached, and I'm going to just sew it on in a 1/4 inch seam. I'm not going to be pulling it. I'm just laying it on as I go. And it curves because it's cut on the bias. It curves perfectly with my round edge. All right, you'll notice I am not pinning it. I find it easier to just lay it along the curve as I go. Okay, now when I get close to where my loose hanging pocket is right here, I'm going to stop. So once I am an inch or two away from that, I'm going to stop. And let me show you what to do to finish. Okay, so I have stopped here. I'm going to lay my piece of binding, my loose hanging pocket, along the curve where it needs to go. You can pin if you need. And this loose piece, oh good, look, I didn't even need that much. This loose piece I'm going to lay on top of it, and I'm going to see where my pocket is, and I'm going to cut this at an angle about 1 inch away from where the pocket's angle is. So then I can open up my pocket and I can tuck my end inside of it and then reclose my pocket. And so now you might have these little tabs here, but that doesn't matter. You can trim them off. I'm going to pin there, and I'm going to just start where I left off and continue sewing so my binding end is perfectly tucked inside of its pocket. Okay, I'm simply going to trim this so those don't create bulk, and there my binding is sewn on. When I do straight binding, I usually cut it 2 1/4 inches wide, but these strips I cut 2 1/2 when I'm doing it on a curve, because it inevitably does get a tiny bit stretched as you're going, and because the curve just takes up more space, I like to give myself a little more leeway so that I'm not having to squeeze it around to fit on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to flip it around to the front, and I'm going to turn my binding to the front like this, and it perfectly curves over the raw edges. So now all that's left to do is edge stitch my binding in place on the front. Edge stitch just means I'm going to stitch right on this edge. So if you need to use clips or pins, you can. I'm just going to work with it with my hands as I sew, making sure I'm not pulling the binding like this. It really should lay pretty flat, and it should just cover this seam from the other side. So I'm not going to pull it. I'm just going to let it lay where it wants to and stitch all the way around it. I think this is so cute. I'm really obsessed with these colors lately. I made another block out of these scraps, and I just really love these mustards. Okay, so a few troubleshooting tips for you. If you have trouble with that final step, if you're missing the edge and if you're just finding it really wonky, another option is to use a zigzag stitch, and it not only looks decorative and cute, but it helps you just catch in the edge and make sure that you're stitching it all the way down. So I hope you have enjoyed this. Don't forget, you can go hop over to my shop and get the printable version of it, along with lots of other patterns and tutorials. I have quite a library over there at this point. And I think I will be back next week with loads of things that you can make with just one quilt block. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see y'all soon. Bye.